Okay, thank you very much for this great opportunity. I've really enjoyed this conference so far. Big thanks to the organizers. It's been great. So my name's Daniel Packwood from Kelty University. I'll be talking about machine learning for functional molecular materials and supramolecular assemblies. Please allow me to first introduce our institute, ICIMS. So it stands for the Institute for Integrated Cell Material Sciences. Okay, we're part of a network of institutes in Japan called WPI. And this is what we look like. We're a very sort of diverse institute. We encourage collaboration. We've got these open labs that people share. We have open offices. It's a really relaxed, free environment. We have cell biologists and material scientists together. We work between single molecules and single cells in the so-called mesoscopic domain. And we're particularly interested in self-assembled materials for life science and for technology. I'm in charge of the theoretical group. It's a very small group, but we're trying our best. We have three main topics: bioactive materials, organics, and self-assembled materials. And we've got a whole bunch of theoretical techniques that we use to probe these. Now, I don't have time to show everything today, but I'll talk about these techniques here that I've highlighted in red. So let's begin. Let's talk about self-assembled materials. So here I'm showing a schematic of on-surface molecular self-assembly. So we've got a surface and some molecules have been placed on that surface. And the molecules interact with each other. They come together to minimize their energy, and they form this molecular assembly that you can see here. There's plenty of experimental examples of these from a technique called scanning tunneling microscopy. Okay, there's plenty of examples in the literature. You can see different molecules form different shapes. This one forms kind of like a ring. This one forms this brick-like pattern. And there's lots of potential applications. There's molecular electronics, spintronics, organic electronics. There's a lot of excitement about this field, but there's a big problem. It's extremely hard to predict and to control these molecular assemblies. That's a real critical problem, preventing the realization of these applications. So some recent works that we've been doing in our group over the last several years, we've been using machine learning to accelerate simulations to predict on-surface assembly. We've been doing a little bit of informatics associated with self-assembly too. I'll talk about that today, and a little bit of surface characterization simulations as well. But today I'll just talk about the first two topics. So machine learning accelerated simulation, what's this about? Well, firstly, how do you predict molecular self-assembly? What's the technique that you would use as a theoretician? Well, conceptually, it's very easy. You put molecules on a surface, you make some slab model, put the molecules on, and you shift them about little by little. Okay, maybe shift this one over here a little bit. Here we've shifted this one over here. You just shift them about little by little until your energy reaches its global minimum. And hopefully the molecule should be nicely assembled like so. And there's lots of techniques for this. There's genetic algorithms, there's types of Monte Carlo, all kinds of ways of doing that. No problem. Here's the problem. At each step, you've got to calculate the energy, the total energy of the system. Now, this is an approximation, but I've written it as a sum of a molecule surface interaction and a molecule-molecule interaction. This one here, this is not bad. You can calculate that from DFT. You can use the symmetry of the surface. You can tabulate those values. Just look up the values as you go through the simulation. This guy here is not too bad. This one here is the monster. What's wrong with this? Well, for a medium-sized molecule, say 40 to 60 atoms, on our cluster, on our little machine, takes about 3 minutes to get these by DFT. If you've got 8 molecules on the surface and you're doing this in sequence, you're looking at about 84 minutes, which is okay, it's not bad. But look at this. Genetic algorithms, Markov chain Monte Carlo, this N could be in the order of 1 million, 100 million, okay? You're going to get 160 to 16,000 years worth of waiting in order to make this prediction, okay? It's clearly infeasible. But I think no one in this audience will be surprised. That's the job that you can solve using machine learning. So we've been working on this for several years. This architecture I'm presenting for predicting the interaction energy is actually quite old. We presented it in 2017. We still use it because it's very effective. Here I'm describing it for the case of these two molecules, iron fluoro for phthalocyanine and manganese for phthalocyanine, adsorbed to gold 111. So the two molecules go into this pipeline. We create a Coulomb matrix, a very simple descriptor that's very well established for these systems. We classify the interaction as being weak or strong. If it's weak, we approximate the interaction as being 0. And if it's strong, it goes into a kernel ridge regression model from which the prediction is made. And this is the kind of performance we can get now with our model. It's pretty good. So the support vector machine, which does the classification, it can classify weak and strong pretty accurately. Fail rate's about 0.6. And here's our kernel ridge regression estimator here on a test set of about 700 diners. So it's pretty good. And of course, this is not a surprise to the audience, but I just want to emphasize this. The prediction time is very short with this model. We're looking at less than half a second. I haven't actually timed it, but I'm sure it's very, very quick compared to about 3 minutes with DFT. So we can take our machine learned potential and we put it into some protocol for doing our optimization. I've got a 2-component protocol here, a genetic algorithm coupled with the Markov chain Monte Carlo. That's the red part. So the genetic algorithm gives you a rough approximation of what the molecular assembly should be. And then with the Markov chain Monte Carlo, you're more delicately sampling the equilibrium state, the thermodynamic equilibrium around that state here. And we start to predict some assemblies like these, which look a little bit like the STM images that are presented by experimentalists. Now we can make this comparison a little bit more quantitative. So here I'm plotting my configurations from my Monte Carlo simulation in 2 dimensions using the TSNE technique. Several people have presented that already. It's not a very exciting phase diagram. I guess you're seeing 2 phases at the different temperatures, S1 and S2. S1 is a very closely packed phase. S2 is a little bit more loosely packed. But look at this. Maybe at the back you maybe can't see it so well, but the agreement between the S1 phase and the experimental STM images are pretty good. Okay, we can reproduce this distance between the molecules and the internal angles quite nicely. The experimentalists also claim that they can see another phase S2. They didn't characterize it in detail, but it sounds similar to the one we've got here. So this seems like a reasonably good prediction method. Now we've tested it for other systems. This is a much older calculation. It was done 2017. We weren't as good at it then, but you can see we tested it out on this dibromobinthroxine, which is predicted, which in the experiment gives these nice chain-shaped assemblies. We can also reproduce that with our method. At the time, we were not so good at doing temperature modeling, but we could still nonetheless predict that you'd see this conspicuous increase in probability of forming this low entropy chain-like assembly with temperature. So you'd see a maximum in that. The experimentalists also saw that. The point of this slide is just to show that we can apply our method to a diverse range of materials. So the question I want to ask now is, can we use this method to discover some design principles from these simulations? So this brings me to the second part of my talk, self-assembly informatics. So what's this about? Well, have a look at this. I've done some simulations for these bianthroxine molecules like I had before, but I've just got different functionalities, okay? This one here is an amine functionality. This one here's got bromine. This has got methyl, okay? They all form very different assemblies at the same temperature. So this one tends to form chains, not exclusively, but quite high probability. This one forms like a cluster of chains. This one forms a big mess. It doesn't form anything ordered at all. There's a strong sensitivity to the functional group, very strong sensitivity. So we made an informatics method to try and clarify the relationship between that functional group's chemistry and the shape of the assembly. So how does this go? Well, we do a dissimilarity analysis. So first we define the dissimilarity between different functional groups. Okay, it's just defined like so. I can go through this equation later if you want, but it's just considering the overlap between different possibilities and also the thermodynamic probability of that assembly being formed at the particular temperature. This is a bit more useful here. So these numbers are giving the dissimilarity between these assemblies. So these ones are very different. These two here are slightly closer. These two here are a little bit different as well. We can make this visual using something called hierarchical clustering. And now things get a little bit more clear. You can see just from this plot that the bromine and the amine functionality, they form a somewhat similar assembly. They get tied very early. The methyl forms something completely different. It's being tied way up here. Now we repeat this analysis for many different kinds of functional groups. There's a lot of computation here, and we couldn't do it for too many. But you can see some trends appearing. So on the right-hand side, we've got functional groups that form these chain-like self-assemblies with very high probability, a 1D crystal. And on the left-hand side, you've got assemblies or functional groups that form these two-dimensional crystals, these kinds of molecular assemblies. And in the middle, you have kind of a phase transition. So you can start to pick off some design principles by looking at the common properties of nearby functional groups. These two are hydrogen bonding. These two have a property called hyperconjugation. These two are electronegative. And these two are what chemists would call small and hard. So what's that telling you? Well, it tells you if you want to make a 2D crystal, you've got to use hydrogen bonding functional groups. Hey, that's not a surprise. Every chemist knows that, but here we've seen it from the informatics, which is quite nice. So this is, I would say, we're going towards an informatics method for self-assembly control. We're not quite there yet. We haven't validated this experimentally, but nonetheless, I think the theoretical pathway we've laid down can be extended. Okay, so that ends what I want to say about self-assembly. Now I'll move on to organic materials. This is kind of a new area for us. We have only just started publishing in it. But I've got two things I want to talk about today. One is materials informatics for organic semiconductors. One is machine learning accelerated simulations of exciton transport. This one here, analyte screening for MOF. We actually haven't published that yet, so I won't talk about that. But this one I'm really excited about. Maybe at the next meeting in China, we can talk about that. So I'll talk about this first, material informatics for organic semiconductors. So this was a collaboration with a Japanese company called Daicel. It's a really big chemical supplier in Japan. An organic crystal is a crystal made of organic molecules. Okay, here's three typical examples. Pentacene, this is really famous. DNTV, this is a famous University of Tokyo compound. Zinc for phthalocyanines, another really famous one as well. These are almost always semiconducting. Okay, if you calculate the band structures, you get a nice little band gap. So the green parts are the occupied bands, the blue ones are unoccupied. Because of the semiconducting property, they are attractive for technological applications. Now, the question that Daicel had for me is, can we design some molecule that has a targeted band structure? So for that purpose, we created a new descriptor to describe these electronic band structures. So I'll introduce it to you now. So here's our descriptor. Now, this is not just for organic materials. It can apply for any semiconductor material at all. Okay, so we've got our molecules here. This is our band structure. What we do is we sample a selection of K points at random across the Brillouin zone. And at each K point, you calculate the gap at that point. So not the band gap, but the gap at that point and the curvature at that point as well. And you make a two-dimensional histogram like so. So this is like a probability distribution, a joint probability distribution of the band gap and the curvature at each K point. And obviously we make N very big so that this becomes very stable. So this, we call it an electronic fingerprint. It's a descriptor for the semiconductor's band structure, and it summarizes information on local gaps, local curvatures, and the correlation between them through the Brillouin zone. Now we can do a dissimilarity analysis, just like I showed before. So these are three different band structures and three different electronic fingerprints. We can introduce something called the Janssen-Shannon divergence. It may be a little bit hard to see down the back, but it's just a way of measuring the similarity between probability distributions. It's from information theory. So we calculate this for these three band structures here. These two, we get JS of 0.28. This one, we get JS of 0.3. It turns out that this value varies over a very small range of about 0.28 to about 0.301. So these two are very, very different. These two are quite similar. That's what it's telling you. Okay, what do we do with that? Well, this is what we do. So we made a massive database of, this took a long time to calculate. We did density functional theory day in and day out, calculating band structures for 6,000 organic crystals. And for each pair of them, we calculate that JS dissimilarity, and we visualize the data using TSNE. So each point is one organic crystal. And the points that are close together, those have very similar band structures. Okay, and we're coloring the points according to the band gap, as I've averaged across the Brillouin zone. So you can see clearly that we can correlate nicely the position of the compound in this manifold with the band gap in its condensed matter phase. Now, this is a very pretty plot, but what can we do with it? We can use it to design molecules that have a targeted band gap in the condensed phase. So we made this pipeline here. So first we select a region of our visualization from which we want to make compounds with a particular band gap. We then create a machine learning classifier that can learn to classify molecules as having these band gaps or not having these band gaps when they're in the condensed phase. This is quite easy to do. And once you've got this, you can just generate a big virtual library of molecules, put them through this classifier, and you can find the ones that are predicted to be contained in this target region. And upon doing that, we could design this compound down the bottom here. Very simple compound. Surprisingly, it's never been made. We look very, very carefully. Now, does this compound have the band gap that we want? Well, it hasn't been measured experimentally, but this is what we did. We could calculate the crystal structure using Material Studio. It cost a lot of money, but we managed to get it. It was worth doing. And then we could get the band structure using DFT. Quite a conspicuously looking band structure, very curvy. The band gap, if you calculate the band gap average across the Brillouin zone, it's about 1.9. This target region here has got bands between 1 and 2 EV. So we're within that target region, not right in the middle, but we are within it. So we succeeded to make a compound which lies within this region. Not only that, the curvature is really good. Now, we didn't design it to have high band curvature, but you can see our curvature is high. It's in the top 3% of the entire data set. And in fact, the effective mass of our compound is about 0.66 ME. This is the point of highest effective mass. So that's comparable to pentacene, which is one of the best organic semiconductors. Okay, so successful design of a targeted band gap material. So we hope to generalize this method later to some other applications. Much time. Okay, I'll just introduce this very briefly. This is a project we did recently, machine learning accelerated simulations of exciton transport. I'll be honest, it's not completely innovative, but I think there's some groups in China who are doing this too, so I just want to show it. So what's happening here? This is about organic photovoltaics. So these absorb sunlight, and inside the organic photovoltaic, usually an amorphous organic crystal, amorphous organic phase, an exciton is generated and it hops between the molecules like so. And this hopping probability is given by this, this quantum mechanical formula here. Now, if you want to simulate exciton transport, you've got to calculate these coupling parameters for every pair of molecules. And with time-dependent DFT, that takes about 7 hours on a really good supercomputer. So obviously, you don't want to calculate all of those before doing your simulation. So we made a machine learning pipeline similar to what I presented previously. And this pipeline can predict the couplings very, very quickly within like 0.007 seconds on this particular laptop here. And then you can run your exciton diffusion simulations in a very large simulation cell, 800 molecules. Here I'm computing the average displacement, and here's the mean square displacement on the right-hand side. It agrees quite nicely with a reference calculation using purely time-dependent DFT couplings. So if you're interested, please have a look at that paper. I know there's some groups in China, they're probably not in this room, but there are groups in this country who do this particular work. Okay, so I'll summarize my work. So I presented work on molecular self-assembly. So we've got accurate predictions of on-surface molecular self-assembly using machine learned potentials. And we also presented some informatics methods to identify principles for controlling the assembly shape. For organic materials, we've got informatics and machine learning to help design organic semiconductor materials with targeted bulk electronic properties. And we can also do exciton diffusion simulations in amorphous materials using machine learned models. Just an advertisement. I've written a book a long time ago. This is quite out of date now, actually. And it's really expensive. I did not set the price. It's a very small book, but some people say it's useful. So if you're interested, please look at it. Last year, we published a really detailed review paper on machine learning techniques for materials chemistry. There's lots of review papers in this field, but ours is much more detailed. We go into the theory in quite a lot of detail. So if you're the kind of person who loves detailed theory, then please have a look at our review. And if you don't like detailed theory, maybe don't look at this particular one. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Danny, for your nice talk.
Thank you.
Now is Question and discussion?
Okay, yeah, thank you. This is very nice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, you pick up that it's like a band gap and the band curvature as like some major kind of some the critical physical property of that. So what's the reason for this now? Also, this band curvature means effective mass.
Yes, exactly. So effective mass is 1 over band curvature, basically.
Yeah, right.
So that's why I chose that. And band gap is the other property that they wanted to design.
So band curvature in every dispersion relation, so you average it out.
Yes. So we create that. So I've got many slides to go through to get to it, but we make the 2-dimensional histogram. So it's not averaged at that point. The histogram captures the variation of curvature and local gap across the Brillouin zone. And we base our design by comparing those histograms.
So basically, band curvature can tell it's like a SP, D orbital.
Yeah, as long as those orbitals are contributing to the valence band edge, so the most upper occupied band, we've captured those. Yeah, it's purely just from the band structure we receive from DFT. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so Daniel, I think this talk is very, very nice.
Thank you.
Well, when you band carriage, I saw that the value is quite big, large. It's about 80 electron volt per square angstrom, right? And so if we search the gap in the whole Brillouin zone, normally we need to look around everywhere, right?
Yes. And
in this case, for your systems, I think this macro molecules. So how do you treat this?
Right.
Another things.
Yes.
I think we have another approach which include the symmetry would be heavily reduced your calculation.
I believe so.
I think you try that.
It's probably a good next step, the symmetry inclusion. We completely ignored that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first questions.
Yeah. So what we've done here. So this is just a comparison. So I want to just roughly compare my material to what's in the database.
Yeah.
So I had the curvature basically all across the Brillouin zone. So I just averaged it and then compared to the ones in here.
Okay.
Now it's very high. I think probably some regions have very high curvature.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be careful though, because in the real material, the part of the material which is important for the application is probably not necessarily this part, right?
Yes.
It may be some other part of the Brillouin zone.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't conclude specifically if this high curvature is actually the curvature that would be useful experimentally.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the situation I'm at now.
I see.
It's just very rough statistics of the whole Brillouin zone.
Yeah. Normally, I think this task would be time so consuming.
A little, and kind of very much domain knowledge, right? You have to find the right K point, which would be active in some transport application.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing is for your first case and assembly. All right.
Yes.
I think that's quite interesting point, and you use this machine learning method. And what I concerned is between different part interpart interactions.
Yes.
How you include this, such as when they close is much close to each other.
That's a really good question.
We should include some one var force, right?
So
or some other molecular interactions. How you treat this problem?
That's why I put this thing here. So if I generate the data randomly, just purely without thinking, just IID sampling, you get most of the interactions are very weak.
Okay.
And some are extremely strong because they're really overlapping.
I see.
So what I have to do is somehow bias the sampling so that they don't come within a van der Waals radius.
Oh, okay.
Now, in my previous implementation of this is the latest one, but in the earlier version, we had two layers of support vector machine. We had another one here. And if the molecules were really close, we had a separate kernel ridge regression estimator for the really high energy predictions.
I see.
Yeah, but the high energy predictions were not so important for the self-assembly. They were so, for the Monte Carlo, they were so high energy, they were rejected during the sampling.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, because time is up.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny, for very, very nice talk.
Thank you very much.